Mr. Dorsey, would you come forward, and we welcome you here and thank you for being here with us today. And what we ask is if you could give us a little bit of we've heard all the timelines, but kind of an update on what's happening, and also maybe a perspective of what we're looking for in the future in regards to this chemical spill. And also I understand there was another, I just caught the tail end on the radio as I was coming in about another MCHM spill in Marmet.
Yes, sir.
If you could give us a little bit of update on that as well.
Sure. I'll start out with the Freedom Site Center. I'm Mike Dorsey, Chief of Homeland Security and Emergency Response for the Department of Environmental Protection. I'll give you an update on Freedom, and then I'll go to the Marmet, and if I forget, poke me, and I'll get back to it.
Thank you.
Not a whole lot, unfortunately, has changed at the Freedom Site since the last time we spoke. We are still actively managing water up there. There's not a lot. The good thing is a lot of the odor has gone down. We can still get an odor complaint occasionally, but we're managing water from on site and off site, pumping it up in the tanks. Some of it's being disposed of off site, some of it's being stored, some of it's being mixed with the product. We are held up right now essentially due to the lawyers for the plaintiffs. We have reached an agreement with the prosecutor's office and the Chemical Safety Board on how to proceed with the tanks up there. But the lawyers for the plaintiffs in the bankruptcy case have insisted that we hold up on some of the removal actions that we are planning. What we are planning, I will tell you this: there are, if you can envision the site, there are the 3 small tanks that held MCHM, and to the north of those there are 2 large tanks. They held glycerin. There's still a little bit of glycerin in one of those. The process going forward is to clean the 2 tanks on the north end of the tank that did not hold MCHM and start dismantling them. We hope to start that work next week. After that, then we'll move to the MCHM tanks, and there are a couple of fiberglass tanks behind there holding fatty acid, that aren't really in play. They'll just be taken out of there. Once the 2 large tanks are removed, then we'll have some space out there if we need to excavate soil, which we're almost certain we'll have to do. We'll have a place to store it, and we also have the collection sumps in that area to contain any spillage that might occur. In addition to that, we're planning on putting another collection sump right outside the containment wall on the north end of this facility to just give us an extra layer of protection. As I've spoken before, we have the large containment trench at the foot of the hill, and it's working as designed. It's being pumped hourly since we have a lot of runoff right now. So in the long term, we're going to have another collection trench at the top. We're going to start cutting and removing tanks, hopefully by the end of next week. And when we get the tanks out of the north end of that property and we're able to access the soil under them and get to any MCHM contamination that remains there, hopefully that will address the biggest part of the problem. Now the rest of the facility is going to come down, but I think that we're going to find that any contamination remains is going to be on the north end, and once we get those 3 MCHM tanks out of there, we ought to be able to address that. I'll jump ahead to the Marmet issue, if you don't mind. There was a small spill. There are 2 tanks up at American Chemical Services in Marmet that held MCHM, and there was a valve problem in one of those late yesterday afternoon. And they spilled perhaps 10 gallons of material into the secondary containment. That was backed up by Safety Clean and taken to their site out in Poca, and they'll dispose of that today.
Okay, so there wasn't really anything that leaked into any groundwater. Actually,
No,
the containment worked, and they just cleaned it up.
Yes, sir, and the stuff smells so strong. The odor on that stuff is so strong that people, I think we got a call 3-something yesterday, an anonymous call out of our emergency response headquarters saying they smelled the stuff in Marmet.
Okay, all right, questions? Senator Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually finishing right the last one, but have you checked the integrity of the other tanks on the sites? You mentioned there are 5 of them. If they had any holes, any damage shown to them, like the MCHM tank that did leak?
We have not. The other tanks, none of the MCHM tanks are empty.
Okay.
Most of the other tanks on site are empty also, or very nearly empty. We have 2 tanks that we're holding water in. The 2 tanks I was talking about that we're want to start getting rid of at the end of next week, there are glycerin tanks. and all that's left in them is a little bit of heel. They've been pumped out, or they can't be pumped anymore, and they'll have to open the manways to get in there to clean those out. The other tanks at the site, with the exception of the ones we've been pumping water in, are either empty or very nearly empty. We have not tested the integrity of those tanks.
Okay, it's my understanding that you all found some piping underground underneath the tanks. Could you speak to what's going on with the piping, what all you found?
Well, I wish I could
Is
tell you
there
what's going on
more?
with all the piping. There's piping everywhere.
Okay.
And it goes in all different directions, and some of it we know is associated with the fire suppression system. Some of it appears to be product transfer pipes, but over the course of the life of this facility, there have been structures there that have been erected and erased, and they've left the subsurface material there, so it's a warren of pipes, and we don't have any good drawings to tell us what goes where.
There's no mapping system, no. So when you guys take down the tanks, I assume you guys are gonna dig into the soil and try to figure out the piping system and remove it? Is that part of the removal process?
It'll have to be. The tanks will come down first,
Okay.
and then they're tanks, tank bottoms, and once you remove those, we'll have a better picture of what lies below in the manner of pipes. But every hole we dig up there, we hit pipes going one way or another, and a lot of them are going in directions that don't really make any sense with configuration of the site as it is now.
And what precautions do you have in place in case you had a full pipe of something in that zone?
Well, we have the sumps that I was talking about earlier in collection trenches are our main level of collection. We do have small sumps everywhere up on the top of the hill there that we figure will catch the material if we hit any. We did hit that pipe a few weeks ago down over the hill. It was just a piece of pipe laying on the riverbank. It wasn't connected to anything on either end, but it did have water in it, which did have MCHM in it. And we sampled it, and it came back at 98 parts per million MCHM, yet people were smelling that a mile and a half away.
So it was an open-ended pipe
Yeah.
with nothing on either end,
No.
and it included MCHM in it.
It was laying perpendicular to the river
Okay.
in an area where the stuff came through the wall. The
Oh, so as it came through the
some
wall,
just
it
got
leaked
into
into
it,
it.
yeah. And of course, the pipe was clogged up with debris,
Sure.
so the stuff was just laying in there.
Okay. All right, have you gotten any information to how the in-home testing is going currently with?
No, sir, I do not. I've not been involved in that end of the project, so I don't have an update on that.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have a question?
Senator Miller?
I am curious about the little spill, which was very little. How many of those have we had? I mean, it was never reported much. We didn't hear much about it, not because you wouldn't necessarily report that, but since the big spill, have we had a lot of those little spills?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator. I personally have never heard of MCHM before the spill of Freedom. And we have a lot of odor complaints, and they're legitimate because you can smell the stuff. You can smell it everywhere. We have had complaints in the Marmet area of people smelling the licorice smell because people become sensitized to it. But I think those were just loading and unloading type of people smell when they do that. Yesterday is the first actual spill that I'm aware of.
Are there several places in West Virginia where we keep it stored to be used? Because it is a very useful tool, I understand.
Right now, the only places that I'm aware of that are stored are at Marmet and at Poca Blending, where they took the material from the Freedom site, and they're down to, I don't know the exact quantity they have now, it's tens of thousands of gallons that they're selling from the site at Poca Blending right now.
So where will the coal industry be able to purchase this product?
Well, it's my understanding the Freedom is still selling the material, and I'm not sure what kind of agreement or what kind of shipping agreement they'll have. It's made in Kingsport, Tennessee, down 81.
East.
Yes, sir. And I know that they're looking for, or they told me they were looking for a facility on a railhead that they can ship it that way, but what they're doing right now, I just don't know.
And you have no way of knowing this. I'm curious that if that substantially raises the price of the product.
Don't know. I just don't know.
Let me go back to the site just briefly. You said there were a lot of pipes and lines underneath the tanks that you've discovered. I didn't know that until I heard you say that. But previously that had been oil refinery site, what had it, not refinery, but oil storage site?
Yes, sir.
What had it been before that, you know?
I think that it began life as a petroleum storage facility,
Okay.
and it's been there for quite some time.
Yeah, I think-
The tanks, yes, sir. The tanks that leaked are actually riveted tanks. They're not even welded tanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Mike, you mentioned it was a petroleum storage facility. Did they have to do anything different to convert from petroleum into other types of chemicals, or would a petroleum storage facility be easily used for any chemical, including petroleum or oil or something?
Senator Unger, I'm not aware that they did anything different. They had some people come in and look at the tanks beforehand, before they moved in there. There's a report floating around. I don't have it in my possession right now. But I don't think, to my knowledge, they didn't do anything to modify the tanks that were in existence or any of the structures up there before they started placing their glycerin and salt mixture, the brine, and their MCHM up there.
And do we have any idea how long those tanks were leaking? Because there's been reports, or at least I've read, where maybe the bottom of the tanks had leakage versus on the side, and still do we, and then also I think Randy Huffman at one of the town meetings indicated that, we still don't, at that time a while back, that it was leaking, but we don't know how long it was leaking in the water. Do we have any idea now when possibly this chemical started leaking? And then, of course, we know when it spilled, but do we have any indication of the bottom of the tanks corroded or leaking or anything like that?
They did find another hole in the tank when they cleaned it out. And I don't know if anybody have seen an inside of an old tank, but this tank comes down straight sided, the sides curve down to the bottom, flattens out, and there were 4 inches of rust and flaking, just debris in the bottom of it. And the second hole they found was under that, in that area. We don't know for sure. I had this discussion not too long ago with the Chemical Safety Board investigators, if they have an idea yet about how long it may have been leaking. And there's not been they haven't formulated an idea yet. We may never know that. We know that the smell of this stuff is so strong that once it got to the surface, we smelled it. What's it smell like underground? I mean, is there a big odor? We don't know. We just don't know that.
And with the pipes and everything underneath, if it leaked, could you determine if it did go into the water? I mean, maybe not in large quantities, but could have been leaking, surely being right next to it. Would it migrated into potentially the river and then?
It possibly could have. I think we would have tasted it. I mean, when this thing first started, and I was out there on January 9th, you could see it entering the river. It was going into the river in large quantities. And a couple days later, we had it down to less than 1 part per million. On January 11th, it was less than 1 part per million going into the intake of the water plant. And on the outflow was at that level also, but you could still smell it and taste it in the water. I mean, everybody knows that. I could just smell it and taste it. So if it was getting into the river beforehand and getting into the water, it was at extremely low levels. But no one, there were no odor complaints or taste complaints. And again, I know that on January 11th, once the water sampling got up to speed, that we were below 1 part per million at the intake. 7 o'clock in the morning on January 11th. So I think if it was in the river, it was in very low levels.
Okay. And the other, since your Homeland Security Emergency Response with DEP, do you have any idea, or have you all been doing a survey on the tanks that are out there and what chemicals are located? I know there's a bill going through to give regulatory authority for the above-ground storage tanks facilities that you don't have already, but have you all been doing a survey and trying to identify additional potential hazards in regard, and know the chemical that's in it?
Nothing formal, Senator. Yeah, I think we haven't done
Informally,
anything
you're doing it?
Informally, yeah. I met with the Wednesday morning when this meeting was originally scheduled. I spoke to the Potomac River Commission, which is similar to the Ohio River Sanitation Commission, and spoke to them about this very issue. And we had that discussion with them. We've been talking to our own people in-house about facilities that may be a risk or a threat. But we have not done that formally yet.
Okay, but you are compiling data and information in regards to trying to identify these facilities and understand what's in them, and if there would be a situation, how to
How to
respond.
address it, yes, sir, and I would imagine we'll be doing that formally in the very near future.
The broader question, I know that in this situation, a lot of attention's been placed on what happened, who to blame. But I'm interested really in moving, also putting the discussion in our infrastructure. And with these breaks and pipes and valves and all this stuff's occurring, are you noticing in regards to our infrastructure, and I'm not only just talking about water, but in general, our investment in our infrastructure, where it's deteriorating, it could be an issue, or it is an issue, in regards to keeping us safe. Do you have any observation or comments in regards to, from your position, as you go out there and inspect these things, that in overall, are we, this infrastructure is during World War II, and a lot of it's still there. And of course, one year we had a gas break, in I think Sissonville, and there's been several things occurring. Can you comment on the state of our infrastructure in regards to protecting our public, and any comments on what we need to do to address it?
Well, just from my personal opinion, and to some extent from my position at the agency, it concerns me, yes. We have a lot of old infrastructure, and we've cut back on the personnel that we have maintaining that infrastructure. And those two things don't bode well for safety. We do have a lot of old plants. They've been modernized to some extent, but there's still a lot of old piping out there. And again, as we went through the recession, a lot of positions were cut in areas and facilities that previously were had the job of maintaining and inspecting the facilities themselves and the equipment being used. So yeah, that's a concern with me.
And also, and I guess you're compiling a report as you go along, but do you have any preliminary observations on what we ought to be addressing? I know the legislature is addressing a number of things, the governor's also pushing forward, but something that we ought to be looking at in the future as we go forward, in addition to the infrastructure issues. But do you have anything that you can say that this is the area we need to explore more and do more work in and pay more attention to?
Well, in addition to looking at what's in the tanks and what's above our water plants and our sewer plants, et cetera, I think we really need to be making plans for what if something bad happens. Now, after 9/11, we did that, and we did a gap analysis and things along those lines. But they were looking at weapons of mass destruction, other, the methyl ethyl death, the barrels of ricin. This has been a real eye-opener, and to some extent a blessing that shows us what can happen when something that is not particularly toxic gets into our water supply. I mean, and everybody knows what it did. It was horrible. So I think it's been a real eye-opener that we need to really look at ways to protect our water resources and our drinking water sources.
Yeah, I talked with last night I ran into a person that used to inspect dams here in the States, retired now, but he expressed the same concerns about the infrastructure. And I know that Senator Miller and Senator Laird have been very instrumental in trying to address the dams issue and so forth. But he had said if someone would took any types of explosives and would know how to do this, we would be in big trouble in some of this. And I'm just thinking if this was a premeditated attack of some sort, domestic or even foreign type of a terrorist, how easy would have it been to poison over 300,000 people, create havoc, chaos, which it did, even though what we're seeing is it wasn't premeditated. It was an accident in the sense that some things had failed. A lot of process maybe failed, but if something like that could occur, and so we were talking in the sense that this is situations all over, and you being in Homeland Security, I know that we spent a lot of time after 9/11 doing infrastructure protection and hardening those targets, but since that's kind of gone away, we've kind of gotten back into this relaxed mode again, and I'm just concerned about it. So I guess, what is it we need to be doing to prepare, particularly protecting our water infrastructure from a potential premeditated attack like this that could have occurred?
Well, first, it would surprise me if those who wish us ill had not taken notice of this.
Well, I can't imagine they haven't, because,
Yes.
I mean, it's been all over the international news, so, I mean, surely someone is watching it and saying, wow, here's a situation.
And everybody's been having these conversations about what do we need to do, and some of them are very obvious. Do we have additional capacity? Do we have another source for our water? But everything takes money, and I guess that's the real bottom line. The bottom line is the bottom line. People need to make the decision that we're going to move forward on this, and two, find the resources to do it.
Well, I'd be interested in seeing your all's report as we move forward, particularly in light of the lessons learned on this tragedy, of how we can protect our water resources. And so I look forward to seeing that. Any further questions? Senator Miller.
Just very briefly, you talked about being prepared. When the water bill left here in the Senate, it did ask for everyone to put a plan together, a prepared plan. Now, I understand that there's a change in that, and I haven't followed that closely, requiring backup systems, and are you following that?
I don't know, Senator. I can ask Kristen.
And I suppose my question that, and my concern of that is that a plan can be very simple. As I left here, simple, how do we deal with it on local level? But we're talking about backup systems and tanks, and I know in some of my municipalities, it means they would have to have the water supply, we would have to dam the river to control enough water to keep so many days. You don't hear that taking place, that discussion, though. You haven't heard that.
There's a lot of discussions taking place out there, Senator, but no, I haven't heard that.
Well, that's a concern. I've just expressed that as
Yes.
a concern. I suppose as a question, I could say, is that a concern? But
Yes.
it's just a bit of a concern.
Senator, if it's a concern of yours, it's a concern of ours, so thank you. Any other further questions? Mike, thank you very much, and thank you for your service and
Thanks,
all your
sir.
hard work on this. We appreciate it. Next, we have Harold Ward, Acting Director of the Mining and Reclamation of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. Harold, thanks for coming here and talking with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know if you had any prepared remarks, but I think that what we asked you to come is to talk about, I guess, the coal slurry spill or the situation that occurred. I know it's different from Freedom Industries, but to give us a little background on that and maybe an update on what's happening with that situation, because I know that I understand you've been involved with that.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Kanawha Coal Company, they had on Wednesday night on the 11th, they had a spill, or Tuesday night rather, and it ended up with about 108,000 gallons of a combined product slurry water mix entering into Fields Creek and ultimately the Kanawha River. It resulted, the slurry line that broke it's about a 5,000 foot long line, and about 3,500 feet into the line, they have a relief valve that actually, the primary design of it is to provide secondary containment for the last vertical rise of the pipe should the system failure occur. So this valve at that 3,500 foot station, the failure was there, and that resulted in the water entering the surface water system.
So again, this is an infrastructure matter. The valve, what?
Not in this case. The valve actually had been replaced. It was as part of their routine maintenance at the facility. Their records indicate that they had actually replaced this valve in December of 2013. So as part of their routine maintenance was an upgrade on this valve system, and our investigation isn't complete yet, but it appears at this stage that for some reason the valve did not close all the way, and it was slightly open, and that prevented the safety system that were installed to the amperage indicators and everything. It prevented those from functioning properly, because it provided back pressure to the main line.
Okay.
So it appears that it was ice buildup. If you recall, it was dropped down to 9 degrees that night. But it appears that probably ice buildup prevented the valve from closing completely the last time it was manually closed. And at that point, when they reactivated the slurry line to pump to their cell system, it began leaking. The ice buildup then caused the rubber gasket to tear, and the water was able to leave the system at that point.
Okay, and so human error, there was a human component there.
Like I said, our investigation is not complete at this stage, but it does appear at this stage like at least some component of human error
Okay.
was involved.
Senator Miller, I know you have to go, but you had a question.
I do, I have another meeting.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious, we've been using MCHM for a while in the industry, and it's a pretty useful tool for my understanding in the coal industry. For our
Yes, sir.
initial meeting here we had, as they explained how it's used. What happens to the chemical after it's been used? I have here no problems with it. What are we doing successfully? How are we managing it after we use it?
And obviously, there wasn't a lot of information out there available on MCHM and how it actually reacted in the process. But from all the testing that my office has conducted, it appears that predominantly all the product is consumed in the process. These are closed circuit systems. Ultimately, in a preparation plant, the water will end up in underflow back through the system and reutilized, and then ultimately to the disposal facility, which would be a slurry cell system, a refuse impoundment. At that point, the highest levels we're seeing are actually in the clean coal stockpiles ready for shipment. So it appears that most of the MCHM, and that's the reason it's utilized, it really draws up the finer coal particles, and it attaches to it. It's actually shipped with the product. We have had indications of trace amounts. We've not had anything over the 1 milligram level, but we have roughly 36 facilities in the state that utilize the product on the mining side. Of those 36 facilities, we've tested every one of those, and we have had some. I think we had 3 trace amount indicators where it was actually discharged from the operation, but we're talking well below the detection limits that existed when the Freedom incident first occurred.
So industry's been very successful in using it.
It is used up and consumed in a product. It's highly susceptible to ultraviolet reduction, so it goes photo degradation as well as biological degradation. There's some volatility. I don't think it's enough to credit volatilization as a source of this product diminishing, but there is some volatility to the product, which shows its reaction level. So it's really consumed up quite a bit.
Yeah, and one more fast question before I leave. I'm curious what we do to since we don't have storage facilities now except at Marmad and the temporary POPAS, I suppose. If it has to be shipped on a rail car, what do we do with the cost of this? Do you have any idea, the industry that uses it?
I'm sorry, could you?
The cost.
The cost. There are replacement products available, and several coal companies have already implemented. The Patriot site at Kanawha Eagle was a good example. They used the MCHM product until just about a week before the incident last Tuesday, and they'd switched out. There are some products that are available, alternatives out there. The numbers that I'm seeing initially, and these are very preliminary, but the alternative products result in about a 70%, anywhere between 70 and 100% increased cost to utilize an alternative product.
Substantial. All right, thank you.
Further questions, Senator Walters?
Just one, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being here. What you're saying is that the MCHM absorbs into the coal and attaches to it, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we've had a lot of discussions about MCHM's attaching ability. Does it attach to coal because is it in coal because it's porous? Is it in coal? Do you know the reason why?
No, sir, I don't have that much expertise.
From an environmental point of view, is MCHM better to be used than the others in the products? Do you know the answer to that?
Uh,
Because it does just burn out, as you say, it doesn't leave much residue left over, or is it?
Most of the alternatives that I've looked at, there are products with lesser toxicity, and MCHM in itself is not a highly
It's not
toxic product.
No.
But the products that I'm seeing as alternatives, right now, and I'm limited to what I've seen and what the industry are switching to, what they're switching to. But the products I'm looking at have lesser toxicity that they're, informing us that they're going to switch to. Hazard ratings are about the same, but with probably a fourfold increase MCHM is 2 to 3 times greater in toxicity on the LD50s. So there are better products out there that can be used, and I don't think it's toxicity. The reason that the operators in the coal industry are switching away from it, it's just that nobody wants to be attached to this product in any way, shape, or form.
Can I understand that? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ward, do you have any, from your experience looking at the situations, and particularly the slurry spill and some others, do you have any observation or advice or guidance and where we ought to be looking as a state, and particularly even the legislature, and addressing to make sure it's safer in regards to the industry as well as protection of our water resources and infrastructure?
I think, from my opinion, I support the aspects of increased scrutiny on above-ground storage tanks. So there's a uniform standard. I don't know enough about the bill to elaborate on it, but we need the uniform standard all the way across the industrial, the coal side. And we always seem to isolate coal out because it's so predominant in the state. But we need to make sure we're using the same standards on the coal side as the industrial complexes are required to adhere to. And we need uniform enforcement and across all the agencies. And in the discussions I've had, I know the DEP, we're pushing for that very hard, and we're looking first at what we can do without legislation, of course, because there are some authorities out there without it. But I know that we are looking at the possibility of introducing some additional measures. So,
Now, introducing additional measures would be administratively within your office and/or legislatively as far as in the future, or what are you looking at?
From my office, both.
Both.
Yes, sir. There's some things that I think that is in the authority of my office to do right now. And of course, what I don't, that I would propose that to the Secretary for consideration and put that in the process for legislative action.
When do you have any idea when those would be available? The reason I suggested it's too late now to necessarily put through any legislation that could address anything at this point. However, we will be starting to turn our attention to the interim committees, and this will give us an opportunity to continue to study and look at some of these proposals. Do you have any idea when some of those may be available? And of course, I know they don't necessarily have to be advocated, like we have to do this. What we're looking at is things we ought to be looking at as far as some guidance. Here's some areas we should be studying, bringing the stakeholders together, having discussion, and so forth, so we can prepare for either a special session, if there ever is one, or the next legislative session, which we know will come next year. So you have any determination when that could be provided for us?
We're working on it diligently. Obviously, the last few days we've had some incidents and been pretty busy, but I hope to have some suggestions for the Secretary to consider within the next 2 weeks.
Okay. All right. And of course, we'd be interested in working with you to work through those issues, and also the stakeholders and community. So, but we look forward to working with you. Any further questions? Mr. Ward, thank you. Thank you for your service, and Thank you for being here with us Friday morning.